South Africa is investigating how 153 Palestinians from Gaza arrived without proper documentation. It's raised fears, was the chartered flight organised by Israeli-backed human trafficking networks? And is this part of a wider strategy of ethnic cleansing? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. A journey of suffering. That's how a Palestinian man described his transfer from Gaza through Israel and Kenya to South Africa. A journey so desperate that Palestinians paid thousands of dollars to leave their homes without knowing where they were going. A journey forced by more than 2 years of Israel's genocide, bombardment, destruction, famine and forced displacement. In February, Israel and the United States proposed transferring Palestinians out of Gaza to create what President Donald Trump called the Riviera of the Middle East. Arab states have repeatedly rejected calls to take in forcibly displaced Palestinians, while human rights groups have labelled it ethnic cleansing. So, do these flights set a precedent for further forced transfers and signal a push towards the mass expulsion of Palestinians yet again? We'll put these questions to our guests in a minute, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
A chartered plane carrying 153 Palestinians landed at Johannesburg's main airport on Thursday. It had been a long journey from southern Gaza through areas under Israeli military control to the Karam Abu Salam crossing to Israel's Ramon airport, and from there onto a plane that transited through Nairobi before reaching South Africa. Border authorities kept them on board without food, water, or proper ventilation for 12 hours. They had passports, but not the required exit stamps from Israel. Eventually, they were allowed in on visitors' visas, and 23 of the passengers continued on to other countries. But questions remain about the little-known organization that orchestrated their journey. Majd Europe required payments of thousands of dollars to transfer Palestinians out of Gaza using unofficial channels. Al Jazeera spoke to one man who says he was part of the group who traveled last week. He says organizers worked closely with the Israeli army and that passengers knew nothing about their final destination.
There are representatives of the foundation, about 3 people who are inside Gaza, and on the outside, a number of Palestinian Israelis. All communication is done through these individuals. After the security screening is completed, the fees are paid by each person.
It's unclear who's behind the organization. Its website lists an address in Sheikh Jarrah in occupied East Jerusalem, but there's no visible signage or a clear office at that location.
The website for the company itself is incredibly strange, almost created by AI. The faces, there's not really any names, there's no any associations. So it's hard not to think of this, and I've done a lot of work over the years around disaster capitalism, the concept of people making money from others' misery, and this has very much the flavour of that, outrageously.
The Israeli government has a policy of facilitating what it calls the voluntary migration of Palestinians, part of U.S. President Donald Trump's vision for the territory.
We should go to other countries of interest with humanitarian hearts, and there are many of them that want to do this, and build various domains that will ultimately be occupied by the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza.
After 2 years of Israel's genocide, life in Gaza is a daily struggle. Israel is limiting the entry of humanitarian aid, and authorities have warned so-called displacement agents are taking advantage of a desperate population. Critics say Israel is making Gaza unlivable, forcing Palestinians to leave if they want to survive, and offering no guarantee of return. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Okay, that's a backdrop to all this. Let's bring in our guests now. We've got Imtiaz Sooliman, who's the founder and chairman of Gift of the Givers. That's a charity that's assisting the group of Palestinians who arrived in South Africa. He joins us from Pietermaritzburg in South Africa. Ori Goldberg is an Israeli political commentator joining us from Tel Aviv. And in Normandy in France, we welcome William Schabas, who's a professor of international law at Middlesex University. Warm welcome to all of you. Let's first assess what we know and what it means, because it is a pretty confused picture, as you know. Imtiaz, first of all, so your organisation, Gift of the Givers, has been dealing with the Palestinian arrivals in Johannesburg. Tell us more about what you gleaned from the passengers, about how much they knew about the journey that they have been on.
Good afternoon to everyone. They knew nothing about the journey. They didn't know where they were going to. Some thought they were going to Indonesia. Some thought they were going to Malaysia. Others thought they were going to Kenya. Nobody knew they were coming to South Africa. They had absolutely no idea. But remember, this is not the first plane that we're talking about. This is the second plane. The first plane arrived on the 28th of October, and no one in the country had any knowledge of that plane coming to South Africa. The same organization called Majd apparently made arrangements for them to come to the country, promised them accommodation of a very good standard, promised them total resettlement in South Africa, food and every type of supply, 4 months accommodation, and everything to take care of them. When they came, nobody received them. They didn't know where they were going. They were put into areas around Johannesburg. They were not put in one area. They were separated into low-income areas. And by the way, totally by chance, a pastor, a Christian pastor, Nigel Branken, came to know about it through somebody, some activists who mentioned there's some Palestinians here, we don't know how many, and then together with some of my team members, in their own capacity, not as Gift of the Givers, started trying to locate these refugees all over Johannesburg, and finally found about 100 and something, although we heard that 176 had arrived. And
So
from
Imtiaz,
those refugees...
Imtiaz, what does this tell you
Yeah.
about what's happened here? What do you think has been going on?
There seems to be some complicity, you know. You cannot enter a country without your civil aviation authority knowing that a plane is coming. It's not common that a plane comes from a war zone with 176 refugees on one plane and another 153 passengers on another plane. This is not common practice. South Africa doesn't get plane loads of refugees coming, you know, in our country. So who authorized the landing in South Africa? Civil aviation falls to the Department of Transport. The first group of people come through the Border Home Authority. They need the permission of the Department of Home Affairs. How come in the first plane they are told they have no exit stamp and they enter the country? Is there some complicit behavior within people, within the South African government or government departments? Because this is not controlled by international relations. This is very, very, you know, sinister. And we need to know how people enter our country and not told where to go. And they're lost after 2 years. What kind of turmoil and trauma is that? So I've called for an investigation into why this has happened. And the department has to account for this.
Okay, let's get an impression from Tel Aviv now. Ori Goldberg. Very sinister, says Imtiaz. We know that the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, were not involved in this transfer. They say they were not involved in it, as they always are in facilitating anything that leaves, anything and anybody that leaves Gaza. The Palestinian we heard from in Alexandra's package just now said that the Israeli army helped facilitate the boarding of the plane and so forth. So what does it tell you about what's potentially been going on within Israel here, given what we've heard in the past of Palestinians being encouraged to leave Gaza?
Well, I think I'd like to suggest two parallel ways of looking at this mystery flight. One is very, very seriously. Undoubtedly, there's complicity, as Imtiaz just said. There's obviously a conspiracy of sorts that involves people in official Israel and possibly in official South Africa. This could not have been carried out without anyone having any kind of knowledge. This isn't even a maritime ship. This is an airplane and is heavily regulated in terms of paths and routes and access and so forth. And Israel has declared its willingness to encourage what it calls voluntary expulsion, which is, of course, a contradiction in terms. There's no such thing. This is ethnic cleansing for all facts and purposes. So this should be taken very seriously and investigated. But this should also be seen as a gesture of how weak and inept and completely devoid of capacities to actually carry out mass endeavors the Israeli system currently is. I mean, previously when Israel fought, and you showed an image of President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu side by side at a press conference talking about this. This, as far as Israel is concerned, was an eternity ago. Israel's status has changed radically over this period. Nobody's asking Israel, certainly not the Trump White House. Nobody's consulting with Israel. Nobody wants Israel's operational input or principled take on any such endeavor. And it's not because people care about the Palestinians, but because Israel is considered by all of its potential partners in the stabilization of Gaza as an agent of chaos, as a rogue country, as someone who's interested only in pursuing obstacles and disturbance. And I would think about this move as something somewhat akin to Texas Governor's Greg Abbott's radical provocation of putting local immigrants on buses and sending them to so-called shelter cities in the United States, saying, well, you want them so bad, go ahead and take them. And in that case, it isn't coincidental that their destination was South Africa, which is considered very much empathetic to the Palestinian cause.
Okay, let's bring in an expert in international law, William Schabas in Normandy. How do you see this, William?
Well, of course, it's an indication of the tragic situation that the Palestinians are in, the desperation that people feel needing to get out of Gaza and to go someplace where they feel they'll be safe and secure. They are, in a way, typically being exploited by those who profit off the misery of those who are fleeing situations of conflict and of persecution. So, it's something we see in other parts of the world. It's a very troubling development because of the suggestion that it may be the beginning of an attempt to displace Palestinians from Gaza and to get them to leave in this manner. Obviously, it's not on a scale where we could say that this constitutes a phenomenon of great significance, but it looks like a bit of a sniffle that may indicate that pneumonia is on its way.
There will be those, of course, William, who argue that these people were not forced to go, but chose to go and paid upwards of $2,000, $3,000 to do so. So can we then say it does or does not constitute forced transfer?
Well, I guess that's the question. I think it fits in with a more general vision of the conflict that's going on that does involve displacement of populations. But you're quite correct. They've consented. Mind you, people who upped and packed their bags and moved from one side of Gaza to another were, in a sense, doing this forcibly as well. They weren't doing it always at gunpoint, but they were in circumstances where they saw there was no other alternative, and people respond differently in those situations. There were people in Gaza City who refused to move, and there were others who, when the Israeli army said that that they were going to be attacking and to clear out, there were people who packed their bags and moved. So, the consent is an element, and it certainly has to be taken into account in assessing whether this is specifically some sort of illegal action, where that there's a question of illegality. But to me, it just fits in with a much broader portrait of what's going on, which is the objective of the people in power in Israel to clear Gaza of Palestinians, and there are different ways of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So, Imtiaz, there is that deeper question here, isn't there? The Palestinians in Gaza, whatever, being forced into this position by Israel's complete destruction of the land they live in.
Okay, obviously, they bombed the hell out of them, killed 1,300 healthcare workers, killed 300 journalists to hide the story, starved them to death, and say, you know what, maybe you'd like to go. Would you like to go? And once you agree, deciding they're bombing you and killing you, who's going to say no? After 2 years of continuous hell on earth, any human being worried, they're not going to say, okay, let's think, maybe we shall stay in Gaza, we have to build a future here, we're going to look after the country, we're not going to leave, we'll stay here. Who's going to say that? And if some of their relatives are outside the country, they want to reunite with their son, their mother, their child, their father, they want to do that. And above all, if they're not going to make it, they're going to look for the future of their own children. What happens to the future of our children? Maybe we can go out And if there's some law allows that, maybe we'll come back. But under circumstances, once we leave, we can't come back under under Israel's own law right now. So yes, to me, this is forced migration, no matter what terminology we use. They bombed on one side and forced to go up on the other side. There's no other explanation for this. And of course, how could you do this? You're complicit. The Israeli army is helping you do this. They're working with you. So don't they know that you're coming out of Gaza? It's a planned, coordinated effort. You pay the money, you get taken out of Gaza, you go into Israel, you go to the airport, to the military airport, and you're flown. This is complicit all the way.
Ori, back in February, we had the whole Riviera plan, didn't we, that was promoted by Donald Trump, amongst others, that foresaw a Gaza emptied of its current population. Does this kind of tie in with that view from the point of view of people inside Israel?
Well, it ties in with the point of view of some people inside Israel, most definitely, but it also doesn't appear to tie in with the Trump administration's view. President Trump talked about this Riviera, and he talked about it for 2 or 3 days or a week, and then it faded away. Israelis held on to it as though they were holding on for dear life, because the fantasy, the desire to rid Israel of Palestinian presence, again, not so much a land grab or the physical eradication, but to have the Palestinians gone, it's very much a collective fantasy of sorts throughout official Israel and throughout Jewish Israel generally. But it didn't materialize. It didn't materialize back then, and it doesn't look like it materialized now. I want to return for a second to this notion of human trafficking. This isn't the first time in this conflict, throughout this genocidal campaign, where Israelis and Americans make a profit off of the distress of Gazans. I'm talking about the infamous Gaza Health Foundation, the humanitarian stations where food was supposedly distributed to Gazans, but every day dozens and dozens were killed by Israeli soldiers who explained that they were in fear for their lives because of the commotion and the unexpected nature of the crowd. That was a semi-private business. It was run by private entrepreneurs. That's what they call themselves, both the Israeli and the American side. So I think what we're looking for, or what we're seeing here, I agree with Professor Schabas. Undoubtedly, this could be a sniffle that may augur pneumonia, but it can also be some kind of local initiative or something expressing the general Israeli spirit, which is not linked to any strategic plan. Looking across the board at Israel's behavior in Gaza at the moment, it doesn't seem like Israel has much of a strategy. I think Israel is firing the few guns it has left. It still has the discretion that allows it to kill Palestinians almost at will and to bomb and to destroy. But as far as being influential in shaping the future of Gaza, Israel is capable of pulling off things like this flight, which again reminds me of Governor Abbott's attempt to ship off the immigrants, the undesirables he didn't want, to shelter cities, and not much more than that.
Yeah, Professor Schabas, this brings us back to the point of this issue of disaster capitalism and the fact that these flights cost around $3,000, which is beyond the reach of most people in Gaza, but it still relatively is not a huge amount. So what would that tell you about the potential driving force behind this operation?
Well, I guess it suggests that there's that they're not making the price so high as to make it unreachable for people to do and to get involved in this. But at the same time, it's not on a scale as yet where we can say that this represents some sort of a policy or a serious initiative. It's intriguing, the fact that they were taken there with the full cooperation of the Israeli government. Obviously, they crossed into Israel, into Israeli territory as such, and they left without proper exit stamps in their passport. And there's something very fishy there. Mind you, the minute they leave Gaza, in some ways, they will be deprived under Israeli law of the right to return, and certainly leaving Israel. Of course, they retain the right to return under international law. And even to the extent that they claim to be refugees, of course, they have this fundamental right. But beyond that, it's intriguing. It's a bit puzzling, and to some extent, we have to wait a little while to see how whether this continues, how structured and organized it is, before drawing firm conclusions.
And Imtiaz, this right to return that Professor Schabas is talking about is fundamental, absolutely, to this, isn't it?
Yes, but will it happen? That's the question. Will they be allowed to return, although they have that right? They have the right to freedom, they have the right to water, to air, to oxygen, to everything else. But it doesn't happen in that part of the world. And nobody forces it. The United Nations, in essence, is non-existent, to be honest. South Africa has taken them to the ICJ, to the ICC. So many rules have been passed, but nothing in essence has happened. The situation has just got worse over 2 years, with everybody protesting in the streets, governments complaining. But in essence, the lives of the people are no different in Gaza. Nothing like the safe havens like in Bosnia were created. We need a huge safe haven, one big safe haven called Gaza. But instead of people being shipped out on planes, we need those borders to be open and allow hundreds of thousands of Gazans to come back from 7 October 2023 and before that period. That's what we need right now.
Ori, what do you say to those who talk about the potential hypocrisy here in that Israel can and do refuse medical evacuees from leaving Gaza? WHO say they want tens of thousands of people to leave for medical reasons, but most of them are refused. And yet here, pay $2,000 or $3,000 and on your way, out you go.
I would say that hypocrisy is a very understated, polite way of treating it. This is, as Professor Schabas and Imtiaz has stated, this has always been a part of Israeli policy, and I would add as an Israeli that it's been a part of a collective desire. I called it a fantasy before, perhaps a desire would be better. Israel wants the Palestinians gone, but Israel has failed. Israel could not make the Palestinians disappear. And standing up for the rights that were mentioned, like the right of return, is, I agree, a specific cause at the moment, but I think there's absolutely no doubt who's in the wrong and who's in the right here. And again, Israel has handled this whole affair in a tremendously shady manner, from providing private individuals with profit to doing this very mysteriously without alerting authorities in other countries and so on and so forth. This is not an indication of strength. This, to me, does not show a conviction to carry this out or an initiation of some sort of broad policy. This is an act of desperation as far as the Israelis are concerned. They're seeing the glorious initiative of voluntarily persuading Palestinians to leave Gaza and never to return simply dissipate, and this is the best they can do in order to retaliate.
Indeed. William, I wonder very briefly if you could just consider the role of regional states here and the need now, particularly, to step up the coordination of a new governing structure and reconstruction within Gaza, given that this kind of thing is likely to continue.
Well, the regional states, essentially the Arab countries in the region, have been very disappointing in many respects throughout this entire conflict. Of course, their refusal to encourage any departure by Palestinians is correct and very laudable in that sense. The Israelis hate hearing this, but what this is reminiscent of is people being driven out of a country back in the 1930s. I'm referring to the fact that the Nazi Germany had made that country so inhospitable that Jews were prepared to pay exorbitant sums of money, abandon their property, and leave the country. And are we seeing something like this going on right now? There are some differences, but there are some obvious similarities as well.
Imtiaz, I want to bring this back full circle, if I may, to the people, to the human story here, those Palestinians who were forced to pay to leave the land that has been destroyed and their lives that have been destroyed. When you spoke to them, when your people spoke to them, what sense did you get from them about their desperation and how much hope even that they have within themselves now after everything that's happened?
It was very amazing. Our country kept them on the tarmac for almost 13 hours. And they had no food or water on the plane for 24 hours. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know where the family members were. They were distraught on the runway. But when they came out into the airport and they saw the activists and the human rights supporters and every South African come to greet them, they said, "This is a great country. Thank you very much. We know what you've done for us. You've given us hope. Thank you." They were full of gratitude, full of renewed hope. full of joy and excitement, that they were free. They said, we came from hell. We came from a terrible place. We've been bombed. We're suffering genocide. They spoke on all the negatives, but there was a spark in their face, in their eyes, a light. My children and me, we are safe now. And they were told that we could give it accommodation, food, clothing, legal support, medical support. They were ecstatic. And more than that, absolutely grateful. Of course, the next phase will now decide what they want to do. Legal teams are going to brief them, whether they stay in the country, whether they seek asylum, whether they go somewhere else. But to answer your question, they spoke of the hardship and the difficulty and the pain. But the gratitude overrode all that, because just the fact that they were free, that they were alive, and they got out of hell, they were just so full of happiness.
That's very touching and moving, isn't it, Ori? And giving that moving story of hope of those few that have managed to leave Gaza, it just emphasizes, doesn't it, the need for everybody, for the international community, for those inside Israel and the regional Arab community, to do as much as they can to resolve this situation as fast as possible.
Very much so. The solution is very simple. It's another potential trap here is the extensive gaslighting that's being used by Israel to say that this is complex. There are a lot of security details to be negotiated. There's nothing to be negotiated. The border crossings should be open. Aid should be pouring in. People should have a roof over their heads, even if it is a tarpaulin to begin with. People should have access to health. People should have access to all the food that's been waiting for them for months and months. The fact that this is not happening is intentional Israeli stonewalling. And I am an incurable optimist. I'd like to think that despite the truly disappointing behavior of Arab countries so far, I think the tide is changing. And I think the tide is changing because people have come to understand that Israel is not as omnipotent as they thought, that Israel does not direct the United States, that Israel cannot kill and destroy completely at will. This is taking a long time because Israeli impunity was such a staple of Middle Eastern and global existence, but I think that impunity is no more. And I think we will see greater change quicker rather than slower.
An important conversation, gentlemen. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. To Imtiaz Sooliman, Ori Goldberg and William Schabas. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can find plenty more on this story, of course, at any time by visiting our website. aljazeera.com is the address. And for further discussion, just go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here in Doha, goodbye for now.